We had his father on the show, and I'm a big fan of his dad. I've not ever met Erich, so I'm really honored to have him here today. He's the Director of Communications for Gun Owners of America, and here he is, an organization that our show really encourages you to become a part of. So welcome to the show, Mr. Erich Pratt. How are you today?
Doing really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are glad and honored that you had the time to be with us here today. And, just a little information about GOA for those of you who may not know. Lobbying organization that was formed in 1975 to preserve and defend the Second Amendment rights of gun owners. Now, was it your father who founded, I always forget, excuse me, was it Larry that founded Gun Owners of America, or was it somebody else?
It was actually a state senator from California who founded it, but my father, Larry, has been its only executive director over these almost 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm surprised you said from California, because first of all, that's about the age that I am. So all of my years, I've only known this to be, a very progressive state. So there was actually somebody in California who was pro-2A 40 years ago.
Believe it or not, well, that was back during the days when, at least I am told, California was flirted with being a red state. After all, elected Ronald Reagan, et cetera. So, yeah, things have changed in the ensuing years.
Oh, unfortunately. So, Erich, there seems to have been, very curiously, by the way, I may add, more gun shootings under Obama than any other administration that I can remember. And he's used these operations to push really a communist gun control agenda. Please share why the progressive agenda is flawed and harmful to the people.
Well, it's certainly harmful to people because the very reason for having firearms was ultimately a defense against a government that was out of control. And that was certainly something that our founding fathers lived and breathed. They had to use their firearms to throw off a yoke of tyranny, because it's one thing to sign a piece of paper saying we are free from you, O King. It's quite another thing to actually put feet to that. So it's certainly, firearms are important, not only in our history, and quite frankly, we see all throughout history that weapons control are used to tyrannize people. You even see this all the way back into the Bible. You look at 1 Samuel 13, where the Philistines had instituted weapons control to keep down the Israelites. So, this is something that has been used by tyrants through the ages. But, fast forwarding now to the Obama administration, it's very interesting that all these mass shootings that occur, they all have one thing in common. They occur in places where guns are banned, what we call gun-free zones. And you just run down through the list. Both Fort Hood shootings occurred in gun-free zones. The Aurora Theater shooting, the Navy Yard shooting, the Santa Barbara shooting, and then recently the Lafayette Theater shooting, the South Carolina, the Charleston Church shooting, and of course the two military facilities in Chattanooga, Tennessee. All of these were gun-free zones. So when a bad guy disregards the law and brings a gun into that gun-free zone, he always finds that he's the only one who's armed, which just shows that while they may be evil, they're certainly not stupid. They want to be the only ones with a gun.
Right. And you actually wrote a recent article on this subject in regard to the Louisiana shooting, which was the last one, and you compared it to a Pennsylvania hospital shooting that occurred last year. Compare those two incidents.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that the Lafayette shooting occurred actually right on the eve of the anniversary of this shooting in Darby, Pennsylvania. And it was last year in July when a mental patient, and I don't know that we even know why to this day, wanted to kill his doctor. So he, by the way, he was a prohibited person. In other words, he was by law had things in his record that kept him from legally purchasing a firearm. But do you think that actually stopped him from getting firearms? Well, of course not, because criminals disobey the law. So he had all these guns. He took them to the hospital where the doctor worked, which, by the way, the hospital was also a gun-free zone. Now, thankfully, the doctor, who was a concealed carry permit holder, every day when he went to work, unbeknownst to everybody else, and certainly his patients, was defying that gun-free zone. And it was actually more of a regulation of the hospital. It wasn't a local code, but it threatened to have him fired if he was ever discovered. But anyway, he took his gun to work dutifully in case there was ever a problem. And sure enough, this one day, this mental patient comes in, wants to kill him. He whips out his gun and is able to, shoot center mass, hits him 2 or 3 times in the chest and drops him. Police said he saved countless lives because this guy had so much ammunition on him. It was obvious that he was just going to walk up and down the halls shooting and killing people. Now, you fast forward to what happened in Lafayette. It's a gun-free zone in that theater, so that discourages good people from, even permit holders, from taking guns into that theater for protection, because what happens if you get found out? You could go to jail. You could potentially lose your gun, maybe even all your gun rights, depending on how severely they crack down on you. So, that only discourages people from being able to defend themselves, their families, and others. And, of course, as we were just talking about, it never discourages the bad guys. In fact, I would say it enables them. It encourages them to seek out these places.
Absolutely agree. And then you said something very key, because even, me myself, I think twice before leaving the house. I don't want to get arrested and thrown in jail and have my rights taken away. Very true about that, which is why we have to fight. But I was curious when you were comparing the Pennsylvania situation, what happened to the doctor? Did he get fired? Was he reprimanded for carrying a gun?
Well, they initially did consider what they were going to do and whether they were going to fire him or bring some sort of reprimand. In the end, and I think in large part due to the police hailing him as a hero and certainly other office employees lauding him to the media, publicly, privately, they decided to do nothing, which I think was the wise course of action. But, and typically we see that when the gun is actually used in self-defense. Now, you have to ask, though, what were to happen if, let's say, on any other day, somebody had spotted that bulge in his coat pocket and he had been discovered and he hadn't been using it in a self-defense altercation, then it's very likely he would have been fired. And that's where the threat really lies, and that's why a lot of good people opt not to break the law or not break policy and hence put their lives on the line when, sadly, bad guys don't care about those ramifications.
No, they don't. So what can we do? What is the solution? Because it seems like there's hardly any really great gun rights states. I mean, right at the top of my head, you've got Texas and Arizona, but most of the states in this country have quite a few gun restrictions or background checks. Our representatives, as you know, it's becoming more increasingly obvious they're not listening to us. They seem to have their own agenda. Do we have any solutions right now that we could do to get our rights back?
We do, and that's a great question. And at the federal level, things are operating much slower, as you might imagine, although we are working at the federal level to repeal these gun-free zones, and we've been working with legislators, especially in the aftermath of these shootings. There's been a whole host of bills that have been introduced to do that, to repeal these gun-free zones. Now, whether we can actually get them past the president, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But where things are really happening is at the state level. And as of the end of the legislative session this year, we now have 8 states that have passed constitutional carry laws. What that means is that people can carry concealed without getting a permit, without getting permission from a bureaucrat.
Wow.
As long as they're carrying without intent to commit a crime, they are perfectly legal. And so you
Wow.
now have states all around the country, and there's 8 of them, but there's about 10 to 15 other states that have legislation where they want to introduce this. So it's steadily increasing, steadily growing, and that's a very exciting trend that members of Gun Owners of America have been very involved in trying to get these bills passed. So just this year, it was Maine and Kansas that joined the list of concealed carry states.
Fantastic. And for our listeners who, a lot of people want to move from their state. Some people we've been fighting here in California for so many years and people are getting tired. So what are the good 8 states for those who want to live in a state where they can carry?
Sure. Well, certainly Maine and Kansas are 2 of them. Vermont is the oldest. They've never had concealed carry restrictions, so they've had constitutional carry forever, as long as anybody can remember. But then you've also got Alaska, Arizona, Wyoming. You have most of Montana. There's just 2 cities, 2 big cities where you can't, but in the rest of the state you can. And I don't believe I said Arkansas, and I hope that's the 8, the 8 states.
Great.
Hopefully you were counting there.
Yes, it is. I wrote them down. So, because we want our listeners to know, what is the status of Texas? Because I thought that was a good state for carrying as well. No?
They had legislation for constitutional carry. It never, to my knowledge, got brought up, but they did make increases or improvements in other areas where they now have open carry in Texas, whereas they didn't before, believe it or not, and also carrying on campuses. So they nevertheless weren't idle, and they did get some significant improvements in their carry laws. So constitutional carry, though, will have to wait for another year in Texas.
Anything that the people can do with those states that are considering it, making calls, any states in particular you think people should focus on?
Absolutely, and what I would encourage is, if people go to gunowners.org, that's our website, and sign up for our free email alerts. We will alert them when legislation is being considered in their state. In fact, there were other states that we were working in. We actually got it passed, but anti-gun governors vetoed it. So that included West Virginia, New Hampshire, and Montana to make the entire state constitutional carry as opposed to just 98% of the state. But the Democrat anti-gun governors vetoed the bills. But by getting on our email list, and it's free, we will alert people as legislation starts moving. And I make that distinction that when it starts moving or when we're trying to ramp up to get it moving, because these are really low volume email alerts that we send out. In others, we don't send out many at all. It's only when legislation is moving that we try to generate action, and it's been very effective, not only at getting at the state level some of these good bills passed, but also at the federal level, stopping Obama. And you may have seen last week he said his biggest frustration of his presidency has been not getting gun control legislation passed, and that is all hats off to very active grassroots members that we alert through our email alert system. Also, we inundate legislative offices with postcards and things like that for people who've become members of Gun Owners of America, and all that has been very effective. Many in the media were very frustrated with Gun Owners of America, saying that we had turned a lot of the Republican senators who in 2013 were trying to strike a bargain after the Sandy Hook shooting, and it was the postcards from GOA members that turned these guys, and they said, well, maybe, because see, they were hearing the media saying the tide has turned, it's time for gun control, but then they were hearing from our members back home saying, don't you dare, or we'll remember in November. And so it's been a very effective mechanism for halting gun control in its tracks.
Well, actually, in mainstream media is not being honest, because I just saw a recent poll, in fact, a few of them, I think one of them might have been Gallup, and don't quote me on that, but there were a couple of really good, polls in which it showed just the opposite. It shows that it's historically right now that there's higher support for gun rights than the last, couple, 3 decades in this country. So that, and gun sales, of course, as you know, being up. So
absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. 2 key polls, one with Gallup and one with Pew. And they ask the same question every year, and they have been for years and for decades, really. And it shows that more Americans do not want more gun control. They want to preserve the right to keep and bear arms, that it's a minority that wants additional gun control laws. And so, much to the chagrin, in fact, even the very liberal Washington Post had an article recently saying that the landscape is just not there for pushing gun control. Not only are the votes not there in the Congress, but the American public don't even want it. So that's very encouraging.
That is very encouraging. But what's not encouraging, and I'm glad you mentioned Obama, he is really, ever since he's been sitting in the Oval Office, really pushing his tyranny, his gun tyranny agenda, but working also hand in hand with the United Nations. And that's concerning. And of course, we heard about the Veterans Administration and kind of trying to work around gun control by asking veterans certain questions when they came in for visits.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So what do you know about all this?
Yeah, so here we have a president who's been stymied, who hasn't been able to get gun control legislation passed through Congress. So he's trying every other mechanism that he has at his disposal to try to enact gun control. So you mentioned the UN Gun Control Treaty. His administration signed that. Sadly, we're hoping for a new president that will unsign us and get us out of that treaty. You mentioned the veterans. Sadly, that actually began under, it actually began under Clinton as an illegal policy, but George Bush signed legislation to solidify what Clinton had started. But it certainly hasn't slowed down at all under this administration, under the Obama administration. So yeah, military veterans who suffer from PTSD or other issues like that based on resulting from their wartime experience, they go for checkups. They go for help. Often what happens is that they will get a financial fiduciary appointed for them. Basically what that means is like somebody like their wife will be appointed to handle the finances because they're forgetting to do payments, they're struggling. They're not dangerous though, and nobody is even accusing them of being dangerous, but because they are deemed as not being able to handle their finances, they're treated as mental defectives, which under the law disqualifies you from owning guns. 200,000 almost military veterans are now suffering under this gun ban. And if that's not bad enough, you may have seen the news that recently now that the president, his administration is trying to use that same pattern now for seniors. So seniors who are getting Social Security benefits, and of course what senior doesn't, if it can be shown that they have a financial fiduciary appointed for them, their wife is handling because bad memory, they're forgetting to make payments, they are now in danger of becoming a prohibited person, and that jeopardizes, you may think, well, it doesn't affect me, I'm not a senior. Well, were you hoping to get, maybe a gun inheritance from your father or your grandparents? This is now jeopardized. So this administration is out of control. They're thinking of every way they can to nickel and dime us. But this last one I just mentioned concerning the seniors is probably the worst because it could affect millions of Americans.
And what's eerie about this too is the fact that our economy just keeps declining and declining, and they know that, and I think there's just the continuation of mass illegal, immigration coming in here. We report on the economy and the job market all the time. So how convenient for them to use money issues as the predominant reason to unarm people, and especially seniors. It really, it sends chills up and down your spine, really, because they're going to be unprotected.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's the pincher movement strategy. So
Yeah.
yeah, they basically force you into needing the benefits, and then you're getting benefits, but then they're going to treat you as a mental defective because because of memory issues, or we've even seen cases, sadly, going back to veterans with taking anxiety meds. Anything like that, they can be now deemed as either mental defective or mental defective because somebody else is handling their finances. It's very sinister what's happening. And ultimately, I think it brings us back to this was the danger in getting government involved in the first place at trying to screen law-abiding Americans and deciding who can exercise their rights and who can't. We don't do that with husbands, before they get married. Let's make sure, that you're not a wife abuser or, that you're going to abuse children. We don't do that with First Amendment rights. We don't, at least not yet, we don't screen pastor sermons. Maybe that's coming. We don't screen editorials by the news media. Why, philosophically, why should we allow the government to be screening law-abiding Americans? It's not even working. I mean, look at the last few shootings that we've had in the Lafayette Theater, the Charleston Church, and the Tennessee military installations. All three of those, the bad guys went through the FBI check to buy a gun. The background check is not keeping us safe. If you really want to keep us safe, get the government out of it and let citizens defend themselves.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you said that, because what are the statistics of areas, if you have them, where there isn't, and it can be world statistics too, it doesn't have to just be in this country, the statistics of where gun ownership is, supported, and where there's gun control. Is there a difference in crimes and homicides?
Well, yes. I mean, what you see is that the places where they're strictly controlled, they're not stopping massacres from taking place. Tunisia, out of 178 countries, if you were to go to Wikipedia and look at the gun control in countries, out of 178, Tunisia has the 173rd most restrictive country gun control laws in the world, and yet, a month ago or so, they had a massacre on one of the beaches out in front of one of their hotels. It didn't stop bad guys from getting guns. Like 40 people were shot and killed. Or what about Charlie Hebdo in France? I mean, they have the laws that the gun control community, the zealots in this country, could only dream of happening, where you can't even get a gun unless you've gone through psychological counseling and gotten a sign-off. And yet, with all their strict gun control laws, and by the way, you're not allowed to carry guns in France, that didn't stop Muslim terrorists from getting guns, getting illegal AK-47s, and illegally carrying them. What's crazy is that in France, you don't even see a lot of the police carrying. And so you remember those pictures where the police were fleeing because they were disarmed. So it just, you go country by country, whether it's England, Germany, France, wherever it is, their strict gun control laws are not stopping these massacres from taking place. Remember Norway just a few years back, that 69 people were gunned down in one shooting. They have much stricter gun control laws than we do. It's not working.
Wow. Well, you cited a recent article that 80% of police in America believed concealed carry would reduce mass casualties. Can you expand on that report and where you received it?
Absolutely. If you go to policeone.com on the web, they surveyed more than 15,000 rank-and-file police officers around the country. To my knowledge, it's the biggest survey of police that's ever been done. And I appreciate the fact that they did this, because a lot of times what we hear are the hired guns, the top brass, who are appointed by anti-gun mayors. And so it's easy to think, well, gee, you know, all the cops are anti-gun because that's all I ever hear on TV. And yet they're just towing the line from those who appointed them. But when you actually talk to the rank and file officer, they are extremely pro-gun. So you've got almost 90% who say that the way to reduce or stop these mass shootings is by allowing concealed carry on the part of average citizens. 90% of them support concealed carry for average citizens. In fact, over 80% support arming teachers and school officials to stop these massacres from occurring inside of schools. So, I mean, just from beginning to, and by the way, they also don't think background checks are effective for stopping violent crime.
Yes.
So,
amazing.
These guys, see, they know. And in fact, they probably resent the background checks because that sucks up a lot of police resources that could be better spent elsewhere. And it'd be one thing if it was working, but it's not. And not only is it not working, it's just philosophically unconstitutional to put a prior restraint before somebody can exercise a constitutional right.
I like what you said, but there has been increasingly reports of police state across the country going into homes. I think we even saw it the New Orleans, a few years back under George Bush, where I don't know if they were police or SWAT or who they are. I even had an associate who I know, whose house was raided. The person wasn't a criminal. They had no search warrant. Still to this day, he does not know who those people were. But they had helicopters and no badges and came and confiscated guns from him. And I've heard a lot of these reports here in California, especially. Have you been hearing these reports? And what can be done? Because it could be a way that they could completely disarm us.
Yeah, the New Orleans situation that you mentioned was particularly egregious, and it occurred in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina, and it was a wide-ranging group of different agencies. I don't think it was any one particular agency. There was even National Guard, but there was also different alphabet soup agencies that were involved. And the New Orleans situation really puts to rest the lie that you hear from the anti-gun side, which is, nobody's ever coming to after your guns. Nobody wants to confiscate your guns. And yet that's exactly what happened in New Orleans. The police superintendent got on the TV and said no one will be allowed to have guns, and they went door to door and confiscated firearms. I mean, and you can even find video of this occurring on the internet. I remember one old lady being pulled out of her home. They took her weapon and she she received several broken bones as a result of it. In fact, after that, now Congressman Scalise and my father, Larry Pratt, went down there to award her a new firearm since she'd had hers confiscated. But that shows the foresight that our founding fathers had in not in granting us the right to keep and bear arms, because they realize that our rights come from God, but protecting it by enshrining it in the Second Amendment and saying that it shall not be infringed. And that's why all these things we've been talking about, whether it's background checks, which can lead to registration, or even full-blown confiscation, why all these things are infringements and very dangerous, and why really we need to be involved opposing even the incremental approach to all of this.
I agree. I also appreciate the fact that earlier you even mentioned the Bible, because that is something that we forget. The fact that the Second Amendment is there in the Bible, and it is biblical to, as you just said, it's a natural right, a right from God to be able to defend yourself.
And you know what? The Founding Fathers spoke that way. The preachers of the day would preach on passages like Luke 22:36, where Jesus told his disciples if they didn't have a sword to sell their cloak and buy one. They would preach on passages like 1 Samuel 13, which I mentioned earlier, where the Philistines had disarmed the Israelites. So they understood that when they talked about God-given rights, they could really articulate what they were talking about.
Amen. Well, I've got one final question. Yes, I'm keeping you a minute over. Some years back, your father and I were both at the Constitutional Sheriff's event in Las Vegas. And, when I was talking to your father about homeschooling, because I'm a homeschooling mom, and he shared with me that you too were a fellow homeschooler, I believe, and you had produced a Biblical Foundations in Government DVD. Is it correct?
That's right. Yeah, people can go to principlesofreedom.com if they're interested in either purchasing I actually also produced a government textbook because I was teaching in a co-op at the time, although now I actually teach groups of students, teach civil government. I just didn't find any that were really either sound and also useful for the homeschooling model. And so anyway, I produced my own as well as a video series, and yeah, that's all available at principlesofreedom.com.
Fantastic. Erich, you're just like your father, very lovely, very courteous, very Christ-centered. I cannot thank you enough for being here today. We really appreciate your time. Please come back anytime you have an alert, anytime you need our help. Don't hesitate to reach out.
I would absolutely love to, and it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me today.
All right. You have a great evening, Erich. That was Erich Pratt of Gun Owners of America. And stay tuned. After this quick break, we've got Andrew Duncombe on, and we are looking forward to his interview as well. Stay tuned.